Good morning, colleagues, and all those who are tuning in or listening to this online presentation. This week's Seder, Pekudei, is really the conclusion, not only the conclusion of the entire Sefer, the book of Shmos or of Exodus, but it concludes a series of 5 Sidros that deal primarily with the command, the fulfillment, the carrying out of the construction of the Mishkan, and its setting up and establishing it in such a way that it becomes a functioning part of the Jewish people there in the desert, and is a forerunner of what we've known later on as the Beis HaMikdash. You have that commandment, Asali Mikdash v'shachanti b'seichom. You shall make a holy place, and I will rest. That's what Hashem said to the Jewish people. Now, what we have, however, in this Parsha Pekudei is not just some sort of a boring repetition, which sometimes people seem to feel that a lot of the mention of the artifacts and the materials that are collected, or how these things are constructed, the different types of parts of the Mishkan, whether it's in metal, or whether it's in wood, or whether it's in hides, and the dyes and the colors, which is a multifaceted presentation in the Torah. But in Parashat Pekudei, I find is a very, very relevant message to events that take place all over the world, and things that sometimes we hear on the radio or see in the media having to do with situations that happen in government organizations or amongst people, and even affects how families are run or how they are directed. Because here, when the Torah comes forth very strongly and says that the person that was in charge of this great project of building the Mishkan was Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur. This was the person called Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the Shevet Yehuda. He was the main, what we would call the architect or supervising engineer of the building of the Mishkan, and his associate was someone, Eliyav ben Achisamach, a person from a tribe, was not considered the most elevated tribe, but nevertheless an integral part of the Jewish people. This Achisamach, he was associated with Betzalel from the Shevet Dan. The Ramban emphasizes that although the language in the pasuk says, "Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'mati Yehuda also es kol asher tzivah Hashem es Moshe," he did whatever Hashem commanded in Moshe, it does not actually mean that he constructed everything there that was in the Mishkan. There were a lot of people that were involved. There were craftsmen of all sorts, of all levels, and of course there were all these contributors of the materials. Everybody in Klal Yisrael was asked to come together, men and women, Noshim, who were weavers and spinners, all types of people that had particular skills and trades in putting all of this together. And Betzalel is described, he did all of this that Moshe commanded. And the Ramban goes into details, which is not necessary for us to go further on that, exactly what he did in relationship to the commands of Moshe, which is discussed in the Talmud in different places, that he sort of rearranged the order, how things should be done, what should be made first, and so forth. But to me, the main thrust of what the Ramban is emphasizing in that pasuk is that the person responsible for this whole great project, beautiful project, which stands there as if to say for all eternity, described in the Torah, is Betzalel ben Uri, ben Hur l'Shevet Yehuda. And what's the significance of that? The significance has a great deal of relevance. Many times we hear, whether it's in government, in corporations, whether it's U.S. government, federal government, local government, state governments, certain things happen that produce what is known as some sort of a scandal. And someone has not fulfilled the mandate of his or her office. Many times it shows a corruption where someone who is in charge of funds, of sources of a treasury, or the payment of certain debts or bills that are supposed to be paid, and oftentimes they find that things are missing, and the individual, and something has happened which shows that someone has embezzled something. So the question always is, who is accountable? There is a very important emphasis that we start today with saying accountability. We say not only are you a manager of a particular office, or fund, or government position, a government power, but you're accountable to everything that takes place there. You have to make sure that the people under you are doing what they're supposed to do. You can't just sit on the top without a managerial directive to every individual that you're aware that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Because if there's neglect, who's going to take the responsibility? You can't blame that particular individual. You are not guiding that person and making him aware of his responsibility. And that is a concept of accountability. The Torah is telling us the accountability of the Mishkan falls literally, so to speak, on the lap of Batzalel ben Uri ben Hur. He was the one in charge, and he saw to it everything was done properly. Moreover, further on in this week's Seder, they give a list of the amount of precious metals and other materials that was gathered together. Oftentimes when there's a fundraising drive, we hear of this in different communities, and a lot of peoples come forth with a great deal of human philanthropy, of goodwill gestures, of giving funds to a particular fund. But later on, what happens to all of this money? Does somebody who's in charge of the fund or works at the fund has put his hand in the till by saying, look, there's plenty of money going around for the need that we need. I might as well take something for myself. I deserve this, or whatever reason they might give. Whether it's a so-called a legitimate Robin Hood reason, or what we might call it, or just plain embezzling. But the person responsible is the one that's in charge, has to make sure that all the details and all of that money, to the last penny, to the last amount, whatever is there, is accounted for. There is this concept of accountability. And that's what the Torah demands from people. It's interesting, and at the end of the Seder in Parshas Noso, when all of the Nesiim, the princes of the tribes, brought their gifts to the Mishkan on the day of its inauguration on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, at the end there is a counting of all of everything that was brought, whether it was animals that were contributed for the korbanos, whether it was different types of objects, artifacts, vessels, gold and silver, no matter what it was. And the Ramban there quotes a medrash by saying that when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash especially, which is a lesson, every penny, so to speak, was accounted for. There was nothing missing. If you add it up, it all added up to the amount that was donated. That's a very important concept of accountability. And when we ever hear of any type, shall we say, of scandal or a type of innuendo that someone has not done his proper function in government or in an organization, it could be in the Jewish community, we have to make sure that the person in charge has to give an accountability, has to give an accounting of that which is done. That is extremely important when it comes to dealing with other people. And of course, in the eyes of Hashem, if you are there in an important place in a Jewish community in charge of an office of a social welfare organization, whatever it is very important that you pay attention to the very last detail of things that are done there. People are doing their job and doing their particular function. I was struck when I was looking at this of something that I felt that sometimes you have to learn from the terrible enemies of the Jewish people, how exacting they were in overseeing a certain project. And I'm talking about the gruesome sight that on a mission to Europe years ago, when we visited the extermination camp of Majdanek outside of Lublin, and we've shown there the gas chambers, the way they was constructed, and especially also the ovens, the iron doors, and they had imprinted in them the name of the manufacturer. And the Germans, at that time, who were murdering the Jewish people, Yamach Shemam, were proud of how exact they made those doors, that nothing could get out, everything was to specification. They assumed that terrible type of accountability. So if the evil people take an accountability for the bad deeds they do, so you would say in Talmudic language, Alachas kama v'kama, we should accept a responsibility, accountability of every good deed that we're involved in. We should be sure of all the details that we're accountable for, and nothing should be missing. Every should be tov v'yosher, good and righteousness. That's the way we build a mishkan, a sanctuary of Jewish life. Let us hope and pray that that lesson here at the concluding of Sefer Shmos, which is the Sefer Geula, of redemption, shall be a schus, a source of merit for us if we assume this type of responsibility and accountability, should ultimately bring the Geula Shlema. B'meira b'yomeinu.